Okay, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. We're 5 minutes after, so let's get started. I'm going to kind of step back a little bit today, and I for the past few sessions, I haven't been here for a couple weeks, right? I had WWDC last week, which was awesome. Had a blast. Learned a lot. Met a lot of really cool people, especially all the Real Mac team. So that was awesome. Learned, met us again, great guys. It was really fun and exciting meeting all of them. And can't wait to meet them again, probably next year, hopefully. Got some really cool stuff coming down the pipe, with Lion, as you guys have all heard, right? And, Camtastic, of course, as you see here, this is my Camtastic app. It will be Lion only now. I can't show you some of the really cool new Lion features because this is a snow leopard machine. So I'm really excited about that. Again, I'm going to step back today a little bit and do a little bit more basic stuff. Previous webcasts, I kind of did, some CSS stuff and kind of diving into a little bit more advanced topics. Again, I'm gonna step back a little bit today and do some more of the basics, right? Get back to the basics, okay? Right now, I have RapidWeaver open, of course, here is a stacks page, right? And we're going to go over kind of the really basic stuff within stacks and really help you guys build a foundation, okay? So as we added a stacks page, of course, Stacks has two modes, as every RapidWeaver plugin does. You have edit mode, which is where you actually edit and create your page, and then you have preview mode, which of course allows you to preview all of the changes that you've made. Okay. So in our edit mode, you also have a stacks library over here on the right, that contains all of your third-party stacks. Hopefully you have a lot of mine, right? And many others. So as you see, there is just a huge list of stacks sorted by the name of the stack on the file system so that you can easily find stuff. Okay. I am going to review some of just the default out-of-the-box stuff today. And maybe at the end, I'll go over a couple of my latest stacks and updates towards the end of today's webcast. Okay. So to drag out a stack, basically if you want to add a stack to your page, you simply take it out of your library and drag it onto the page. Okay. I drug out a text stack in this particular instance here. And to edit that text, you simply need to highlight the text, add whatever text you like. Okay. Now, since this is a text stack, you'll notice down here at the bottom, there is also the default RapidWeaver formatting bar so that you can change, of course, the style of the text. Okay. So if you wanted to go ahead and make that text bold, or if you wanted to make it italic, if you wanted to, change the font, okay, so on and so forth, make a bullet list, okay. So anything that you can do basically in the normal RapidWeaver text page, you can definitely do here, okay. Now a couple of tricks with the text area is, of course, if we were to just quickly add, some lorem ipsum text, oops. Okay, so there's some default lorem ipsum text that we can we have in our page. Now, if you notice, this actually inserted a couple HTML characters. And you can have HTML within your text stack, okay? But if you want to make sure that it is defined as HTML, basically you select your text and then you say format in the menu bar and you do ignore formatting, okay? So that way you can actually mix kind of HTML and text within your text stack. So if you wanted to make sure you had a nice heading or something of that nature or whatnot, okay, you can definitely type in the HTML so you can get stuff exactly how you want. If you wanted to get your hands dirty with some HTML, highlight that and do ignore formatting and you're good to go, okay? But if you just wanted to manipulate straight text and, format it within the normal things of kind of WYSIWYG, right? You can make this green, blue text, so on and so forth. It will, if we go ahead and go into preview mode, we'll see that the text that I had formatted via the toolbar is blue, bold, and italic as I defined it. And then this text that I said ignore formatting, it's just plain text. Okay, it's in a paragraph, and basically it's ignoring any formatting. Okay, so it's just going to take that as straight HTML. Okay. Now I'm going to jump into some more common configurations and settings across all stacks. Okay. So to go into your stack's configuration, there is the information HUD. Okay. And in this settings HUD, you'll notice that this common area at the top is the same for every single stack. Third-party stacks, out-of-the-box stacks, it doesn't matter. Okay. All of these settings here are identical for every single stack in your library. Okay. So let's go over these settings. We have the very first one is, of course, the background setting. Okay. So if you want to define a background, by default, it is transparent. So if we go to preview mode, we see that my background here, now the background of my content area is white. Okay. But basically, if the content area were black on my site, you would see this text on black. Okay. But if we wanted to make that a background color, we can say, yes, I want to choose a colored background. You can then select what color background you want. Let's say we wanted a light blue background. Okay. And then we can easily go and we see that I now have a blue background for my stack. Easy enough, right? Let's go ahead and let's go a step farther. We'll leave my background blue. Let's say we wanted to add a border. Okay. The default border is, of course, 0 pixels, so it has no border around it. Okay. And let's say I want to add a 2-pixel border, and I want to go ahead and make the color red. Okay. So now I've added a 2-pixel red border. You can see all of this happening right here live within the edit mode. Okay. And of course, if you want to preview that, you can then go ahead and see that you definitely do have a blue background and with a red border. Okay. Next is margin and padding. Now, in the past few webcasts, I've kind of gone over exactly what margin and padding are, right? But let's show you an example of what that is. Okay. So the margin is going to be the gap between the border and whatever is next to your stack. Okay. So if we go ahead and let's just increase that, you'll notice that the edge of your stack, the gap between the edge of the stack and then the border has increased. So I've given this particular stack a margin of 20. That means there is 20 pixels between the border and the outside of your stack. Okay. Now, if we want to adjust the padding is going to be the distance between the border and the content of your stack. Okay. So again, margin is going to be from the outside of your stack to the border. Padding is going to be the distance from the border to the content. Okay. So again, all these settings are the same within all stacks. Okay. So this is very useful to use if you wanted to play with spacing. Maybe again, you wanted some more, spacing between the border of something and whatnot. This is where you can change that. Okay. So again, padding and margins. Now, if we wanted to preview that, you can then see exactly what that looks like. We now have a slightly larger gap from the edge of the content area to the border, and then we have a slightly larger buffer from the border to the content of my text stack, right? Now the next setting is width, right? So how wide do we want our stack to be? Okay. So of course the default is 100%, so it takes up the entire width of the page. Okay, so we're going to take up 100% of our width. Okay, but you can easily change that. Let's say we want it to be 62%. Okay, you can easily then do hey, look, now my text stack is now taking up 62% of the width of my page. Okay. Now, a lot of people are wanting, how do I do static width, right? Let's say I want to have, I want to make sure it's 500 pixels. Okay. Well, right now, there really isn't a way in the current version of Stacks to do that. However, if we do go into our page inspector, okay, and look at what the width of my content area is, so I can say width. I know my width of my page is 1,000 pixels, right? And part of that width, let's say I wanted to go ahead and say, oh, look, my content area is going to be approximately, you can measure it out, and I know this is about 750 pixels, right? And you say if I wanted it to be 500 pixels, what's the percentage of 500 pixels to 750, right? I don't know exactly what that percentage is off the top of my head. I think it's about 75 or something like that, right? So, you can't have to kind of do a little bit of math work, right? But Stacks, the whole point of Stacks is having a fluid layout, okay? So a lot of people, think of, I want something to be exactly 500 pixels. Well, a majority of the time you really don't need to have something exactly a particular number of pixels. There are instances of that, and there are third-party stacks out there that allow you to do that, okay? However, the point of Stacks is really a fluid layout, okay? To kind of just let things fall as they are, to kind of, get it as good as you want, right? So I know if I want, about 50%, you can kind of see how things are going to look, okay? So on and so forth. Now, Stacks, a new version of Stacks, what we're looking at is Stacks version 1. As all Stacks 2 is coming out within, the future. So hopefully, there will be new things that you could do to be able to, statically position and have you a little bit more control over that. Okay, but we'll see. We'll see what comes in the future. Okay. Now the last setting that we have that is again a common setting across all stacks is actually a setting that kind of confuses a lot of people, because a lot of people, they say, I want to have my stack on the left, okay? But if you set your stack to 100%, it really doesn't matter this position, right, left, or center, okay? Because if I set it to left and it's 100%, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, it's going to be positioned to the left, but if the stack's taking up 100% width, I'm not going to really notice that. Okay, but if we adjust things, let's go back down and adjust our stack, okay, to 62%, we have position left, position center, and position right. So if we then, preview our stack, you'll notice that, hey, look, I made my stack narrower, it's 62% width, and then I made it, float on the right, okay? So again, if you want to use these positionings, okay, it doesn't make any sense if your width is 100%. You're going to have to make sure, you kind of, adjust things so that, it's a smaller percentage width, and then you can easily adjust either left, center, or right. Okay. So that kind of goes over the positioning and a lot of the default settings within stacks. Okay. Now let's go ahead and do a little bit more advanced, some of the more advanced settings. So let's take these same settings and let's see how we can tweak them a little bit more. Okay, and we do that by, if you actually view in this HUD, you'll notice that there's an advanced button. Okay, so if we want to go ahead and click this advanced button, you will see that it brings up our page inspector and that we have a little bit more granular controls within the advanced settings. As you see here, we still have control over our background color. So this is the same exact setting as if we had, changed it inside the settings HUD. Okay. Same thing with border. We can change our border color. Okay. However, you'll notice that right now, we actually have control over all four corners of the border. So in the HUD here, if we look at this over here, okay, we'll notice that in the border, we really have access to change, all four corners at the same time. Okay, so, but if we notice in the settings HUD, okay, we have access to change the individual side. So if I want my top borders to be 10 pixels, 10. Let's say I want my sides to be 0, okay? I want my bottom to be 10, okay? And I want my right to be 0, okay? Now, just an FYI, if you change settings here, in any of these advanced settings, if you type in your number, so let's say I do 10 here, right? It won't take effect until you either exit that or you click enter or you tab out of it. So if I just said 0 and then I closed my HUD, okay, or I closed that window, you notice that that those changes didn't take effect. Okay, again, you have to make sure you make your change and you either hit enter or you hit tab or you click out of this cell. Okay, important. Okay, so as you see here, you'll notice that I did a top and bottom border of 10 pixels and my left and right borders are 0. And that's exactly what we see here in edit mode. Okay, so very similar to border, we now also have access to change the individual margins on all four sides of the stack. So if I wanted my top margins to be 0 and I wanted my left and rights to stay at 20, we can definitely do that. And you notice that we see that being reflected inside edit mode. So if we look at our edit mode, we'll notice that at the very top, our margins are 0. There is no gap between my border and the outside of the stack. However, on the left and right, we will notice that I definitely have a 20 pixel gap between the edge of my stack, the edge of the border, which is 0, right? Because we set our left borders to 0, and the edge of the stack, okay? Now, other things that we can use this for is if you notice here in the default settings for the stack, the maximum size that I can go to is 20. Okay, so if you ever wanted a larger margin, okay, then say 20. Let's say I wanted to have a 50 pixel margin, okay, and you wanted to have that everywhere. I now have a 50 pixel margin all around my stack, okay. So it allows you to definitely go a little bit larger and manually, put in numbers. Let's say you wanted an obscure number like 53 on the top for some reason, okay? You can definitely do that. So in this advanced setting, that's where you can actually define your own number with no constraints, okay? And define individual sizes for each side, okay? Now, I'm not going to show padding. Padding is identically the same. You can, of course, define whatever size that you want and customize that for every single side of your stack. Okay? And, of course, you can turn that on and off. So if you wanted 0 or less or more padding. Okay? And you do that for everything. Now, you'll notice that there are 2 more settings here. Okay? And what these settings are is render HTML in edit mode. Now, when you have this turned on, you'll notice that your edit mode is it's a little bit more pretty. You can kind of see a quasi preview of what your stack probably is going to look like in preview mode. Okay, but if you were to turn that off, okay, you'll notice that it basically changes from the nice pretty text that you saw, okay, to basically the HTML that would be rendered for that stack, okay? Now, there are some stacks, especially some older third-party stacks. I still have some that are using some of the very original first stacks APIs. And some of those stacks, such as a perfect example is my moving box stack still requires this. To really edit the content of some of the stacks, you'll notice that you actually have to turn off. It is a requirement to use some stacks to turn this on and off, okay? A majority of stacks now has the ability to really control edit mode a little bit better. So a majority of stacks don't require this to be turned off, and it is turned on by edit mode. by default in edit mode. But there are still a few straggling stacks out there that use the really old legacy APIs where it may require you to turn this setting on or off. Okay. Again, any newer stacks probably won't have to have you required to do that. But some older stacks may require you to turn that on and off. Okay. Another setting here is basically if you use pluskit, and you probably know what @import does. It allows you to basically take contents from another page and import it into your stacks page. Okay. If you would like to render that content, seamlessly in stacks, you can basically check this, and it will make sure that the content that you import is rendered in your stacks page. Okay. So that kind of goes over the common settings that you see across all stacks. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and see if there's any questions in the chat room. I don't really see any settings that are. Let's see. If you're not using background color or border, should you use padding or margin to separate content? So, yes. So if you wanted, let's say I had two text stacks here, okay, and I wanted to kind of increase the gap between this stack and this stack. So if we go into edit mode, you'll see that I definitely have a gap here. But let's say I wanted to increase that gap. I most definitely use margins or padding. It really depends on. Or doesn't really matter. It depends on if you have a border. Do you want that gap to be under the border or above the border, right? So I can add a bigger margin to this stack here. So let's say if I want to go down, I want to make my bottom margin here, I don't know, 150. Okay. That will then increase the padding or the distance between my two stacks. So yes, use margins and or padding, okay, to increase most likely margins if you want to deal with the gaps between two stacks. You can definitely use margins to basically play with that, okay, and to shift things around on your page a little bit, okay. Again, the difference between padding. So this stack, if I had I could definitely take this stack and say increase the padding on it. So let's say I increase the top padding. Okay, let's go ahead and increase the top padding to, 115 pixels. Okay. So as you notice, that will definitely increase the gap again between my two stacks. Okay. But let's say I decided I wanted to add a border to this stack. Okay. Now, if I added a border to this stack, all of a sudden things get a little funky, right? Because I use the padding, it basically, I still have my gap between these two stacks, but now I have a big, huge gap inside this. And what I really wanted was a nice, clean border around my content, but keep the gap between my two stacks, right? So to fix that, basically, instead of using padding, right? Let's fix my padding. I would then go to margins and increase my margin, right? Then in preview, you notice that I now have, a nicer box around my content, but I still keep my padding distance between the two items. Okay. So yes, definitely use padding, or margins to increase the content. I recommend if you want to use gaps, probably use, margins instead of padding. Okay. Really only use padding if you want to really kind of nudge your content within the stack a little bit closer together, okay? But play around with it. You can definitely use both, to nudge your content, around your page, okay? So I hope that answers your questions. Now let's go ahead and look at some of the other out-of-the-box stacks, okay? So we've looked and we've kind of gone through and seen the text stack and what you can do. Now, some other features of the text stack that I probably haven't really gone over, which is really any text area within RapidWeaver, is you can also drag in images. So if you have an image, you can drag an image out there, right? And it definitely works. You have your image, okay? Other things that you can do with your image, if you double click on the image, you have RapidWeaver's image manipulator. So you can scale your image, you can rotate it, you can give it a shadow, you can give your image a border, okay? And there's some reasons to do this way. If you notice, the image is definitely by default, it basically is aligned with your text, okay? You do have some control if you wanted to go ahead and select your image and say you wanted to align it to the right of the page. Do you want it centered? Just like as you were playing with text, you can manipulate your image, okay? And again, double click on the image and it brings open RapidWeaver's image editor, or image attribute editor, okay? So that's another thing. This isn't really stack specific. It's really any style text area within RapidWeaver. Okay, you can add text, manipulate the text, do the ignore formatting as I showed you earlier. Basically the text stack inherits all of those features from RapidWeaver's common style text area that is utilized throughout RapidWeaver plugins. Okay. So that kind of wraps up, the text areas. Next is the image stack. Okay, the image stack is another stack that, of course, comes default out of the box with stacks. And if you drag that on your page, you'll notice that you have a image drop area. And essentially, all you need to do is take your image and drag it directly onto there. Okay. Now, you'll notice that, again, the stack has the same exact settings as your text stack. Again, it's the common settings across everything. Okay. Now, if you wanted to, reduce the width a little bit and then have your image on the left or on the right, that's definitely where you can start playing with, testing the widths and alignments of things. Okay. But there's another specific settings HUD just for the image stack. Okay. If you double click on your image, you'll notice that the image will show up in a kind of a new gray box. Okay. And you'll notice that there's a little gear. If you click on this gear, it will show you a new settings HUD that is specific only for images. Okay. Now this is the same if you have a third-party stack that contains an image. Here, let me show you one. Let me find a stack that contains an image. Here's one of my stacks, right? Oops, that's a bad example. Fancy Image Zoom. Okay, so Fancy Image Zoom, as you see here, contains a drop area, drag and drop an image, and you have access to the same exact image settings HUDs as in a third-party stack as you do the out-of-the-box one. Okay, so just to let you know that this little settings HUD is really going to be leveraged throughout not only the out-of-the-box stack, but any image drop area that even third-party stacks utilize. Okay, now be aware that sometimes if you were to add a border to an image or a shadow, it may kind of affect the look and feel of that particular stack a little bit. Okay, so if it's a third-party stack and maybe it's doing some JavaScript animations and stuff like that, if you add a shadow or blur or an offset via these settings, which I'm just going to go over right now, it may or may not work okay. You may need to maybe edit your image outside in Photoshop or Pixelmator or some other image editor. Okay, so these tools are great that Stacks provides, but again, your mileage may vary depending on your third-party stack that you're using. Okay, so let's go over these settings here. The top is scale. Okay, so if you want to scale your image to be 100%, if you want it a little bit smaller, so on and so forth, you can definitely scale your image. Okay. Rotation. So if you want to rotate your image slightly, okay, you can definitely do that. Okay. If you want to give your image a border, Again, this is a little bit different than if I were to give, I'm going to go ahead and make I'm going to keep it. Actually, another cool little thing, if you notice what I just did was I had changed my rotation, and this is the same as pretty much any slider configuration in any Stacks HUD. There's going to be this little arrow, and basically it'll reset it to the default value. Okay, so if you're trying to get it back and you're like, I can't get it to 0, oh shoot. Okay, just click on the little arrow and it'll reset it back to the default value. Okay. The next setting, of course, border, as I said, you can change just like the stack. You can change your configuration and make it, whatever border color you want. Let's say we want an orange border. Okay, you can definitely give your image a shadow. So if you want to give it a drop shadow, okay, giving it a 30% shadow. Let's make it kind of a little lighter shadow. Okay, so again, shadow size, shadow color. You can give your image your shadow blur. Okay, so if you wanted to give your shadow, what size blur do you want? Do you want the shadow on the right side? Do you want it on the left side? Do you want your shadow on the top? Do you want it on the bottom? Okay, so these 4 settings here are, again, the percentage, the size, the blur of your shadow, the X or horizontal offset of your shadow, and then Y is the vertical offset of your shadow. Okay, let's go ahead and preview this and see kind of what our image is looking like. So if we look at our image, I added a border. I gave it a shadow. I made it kind of blurred so you can kind of see it, and it's offset to the left and on the bottom. So as you see, I just had a straight duck image. But I modified that by giving the image a border and a drop shadow. Okay. Next feature, the next 2 settings that are on the bottom of the image settings HUD is file name. Okay. Basically, file name allows you to assign and give your image a specific file name. Now, when you drag an image out, okay, Stacks is going to basically give your image a kind of an auto-generated name, okay? And by default, all Stacks images are exported as PNGs, okay? So I do recommend that you go ahead and Your Head has some great FAQs on their site about image sizes, and if I drag in a JPEG, why is it exported as a PNG, so on and so forth. Okay, so Stacks, if you use this little image settings of this image stack or any third-party stack that uses that API, the file is exported as a PNG. Okay, the default will auto name the file to whatever it needs it to be. Okay, but with this setting, let's say I wanted to name my file Ducky. Okay, so basically I can give I wanted to make sure that this image is named Ducky.png or something like that, right? This allows you to give your image a specific file name. Okay, I personally I've never done that. Okay, I just let Stacks assign the name whatever it wants it to be. I really don't care what the name is, right? And then the alt tag is, of course, for SEO purposes. If you want to put in, rubber ducky, okay, as your alt tag within the image, that way, good old Google and Yahoo and Bing or whatever your search engine of choice is can index your page and find your alt tags of your images. Okay. So that kind of goes over the image stack settings. Again, and all of this settings HUD is available not only for the default out of the box image stack, but it works for any image drop area on all third-party stacks as well. Okay. Now, one thing I wanted to give you clarification on is that some people may be confused at is there is a border setting for your image. Okay, but how does that differ from the border setting on your stack? Okay, well, let's go ahead and look at that. So I'm going to leave my border on my image, and then I'm going to go ahead and go into the stack settings. So I'm going to go and highlight my stack, go into the stack settings, and I'm going to add a border here. Okay, so if you notice, okay, there are two different borders. Okay, the border that was in the image settings HUD went exactly on the image. Okay, but when I added a border to the stack, it basically added a border around the stack. Okay, as you notice, there's a gap between the image and the edge of the stack. Okay, that's essentially because the stack is going to be a div. Okay, a div tag. And that div is currently set to be 48% width of my page. Okay. Now, another thing I should add with the image stack is if you make modifications to this, the resulting image stack actually modifies your image itself and creates a new image with the border and the shadow and so on and so forth. Okay. These effects are not applied via CSS. They're actually modified, added to the image. And when you export your page, okay, you will notice that your image has been modified. Okay, so if you notice here, I'm going to drag this, and here's my rubber ducky image. If you notice, stacks actually added the border and the shadow to the image itself. Okay, it didn't apply CSS to that image. It applied and affected that image inline and actually created a new image off the settings that you defined. Okay. Any questions on the image and image settings within stacks? Okay. The next out-of-the-box stack that we'll go over is the HTML stack. Okay, so we can go ahead and clean up our page a little bit. Okay, the HTML stack is essentially very similar to your style text stack. Okay, however, basically what you do is you type in static HTML in here. You'll notice that there is no formatting bar. Okay, what you type in this stack is what you get. Okay, so again, it's primarily used for static HTML that you would like to, of course, be rendered. So you'll notice that if you click out of the stack, your HTML is rendered. Okay, but if you double click and go into edit mode for that content, you'll notice that you see the exact HTML code that is behind what is in there. Okay, so there's not much else here. There's no different settings other than what we've already gone over. So again, this stack is used for default HTML. Okay. The remaining stacks are kind of utility stacks that allow you to kind of build different things in layouts of your page. Okay, so the two column stack is essentially what it sounds like. It allows you and gives you two columns. Okay, now there are some new settings for the two column stack, and you'll notice that all the settings down here at the top of the settings HUD are the same exact settings as we see on every single stack. So we have width, we have border, margin, padding, just as we do in every other stack. Okay, but you'll notice that there is a new setting down here that is specific to the two column stack. Okay, and basically it's the column split. So if you want, of course the default is a 50-50 split, but if you wanted to adjust that and you wanted to have the left column or the right column bigger than the other, you can easily do that. Okay, so that is the two column stack. It essentially allows you to do some layout, and you can change the content width, okay, of the columns. Now I can go ahead and modify this stack and give this stack a different border, right? So I want to give this one a green border, and then I want to give this one a red background. Oops. Give that a red background. Okay, just so you can kind of see how things are going together. If I were to give my two column stack a background as well, you can definitely do that, right? So as you see here, I now have a two column stack that has a background of purple, a text stack that has a green background, and another text stack that has a red background. Okay, now if you preview that, you'll see exactly what it is, right? There are times I'll actually go ahead and give my, as I'm building a page, I will give my stacks funky background colors, okay, such as this, just kind of see how everything is. I can easily visually see, you know, the spacing between, you know, what is a part of what, essentially, right? Because if I went in here and said, you know, turned off all my background, okay, it's kind of hard when if we look at this in preview mode. Yeah, I have a, you know, a text area here and another text area here, but by adding the really funky background colors, I can kind of visually see where all the components of my page are and how that's building out and what's the spacing between each one and so on and so forth, right? It's just a trick that I use. Of course, I don't recommend anyone ever publishing a page that has colors like that, but it is a technique to kind of see and visually see the blocks of stacks on your page and how your page is being organized and used, okay? Just a small little tip and trick there. The next stack is similar to the 2-column stack, but it's a 3-column stack. So if you wanted to have, you know, 3 text columns in here, okay? Or if you wanted, let's say we wanted to have, go ahead and, another trick, if you noticed, I actually didn't have an image stack in here, but if you just drag an image onto an empty stack area, it'll automatically insert an image stack for you. Okay, so that's a good little tip. You don't have to actually drag an image stack out, okay, and then drag an image into it. Okay, no need for that. You could just drag the image out onto your page, and it'll automatically insert a image stack for you. Okay. So the 3-column stack, just like the 2-column stack, basically has the same exact settings as every other stack does, and then another split. Okay, so this basically allows you to define how wide of a gap do you want the side versus the center column. Okay. And same thing applies. You can go ahead and tweak the individual settings for every single stack in here, and each one can have its own padding, margins, backgrounds, borders, so on and so forth. Okay. The next stack is a stack. Okay. And essentially what it is just a generic drop area. Okay. Now, I admittedly don't use this for very much. Okay, but it is useful when you want it, right? It's useful if let's say I wanted to have a stack where essentially I wanted to have a background, okay? For some reason, I wanted to give it a purple background. Oops. I wanted to give it a border, okay? Let's increase the padding a little bit. And then inside here, I wanted a text stack, which had its own border, okay, and its own background, okay. Okay, this allows you to do that. So basically, it's a generic box, okay, that lets you, you know, add anything you want into it, okay. Now, there is another thing that probably the most useful that I use the generic stack for, is actually creating lines, right? So a lot of you probably know that you can go ahead and insert an HTML stack and then insert the code HR, okay? And basically you get a line, okay? And then you can go ahead and adjust the width of your line and so on and so forth, right? Okay? That's all great and fine and dandy, but what if I wanted to actually you know, change the color and have a blue line or something of that nature? A really easy thing to do is essentially go ahead and add a stack out here. Okay, just a regular empty stack. Okay, let's go to advanced. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn, let's see, I want border. Okay, I want a, let's do a orange border. Okay. And I only want to give it a bottom border. I'm going to give it a bottom border of 2 pixels. Okay. Let's adjust the width a little bit. There we go. I have an orange line, right? Now there are other things you could do, such as if you were to have my styled stack, you can do the same exact thing, but add maybe a little drop shadow to it as well, so that you kind of have a line with a nice little drop shadow on it. Good effect. I use that as well. Okay, but again, just a trick if you just want a simple line. You don't need to have anything in the stack at all, right? But it makes a nice little separator. And then you can play with the margins here to basically give the gap between, your two areas. So if I have my 3-column stack here, my 2-column stack there, okay, if we preview that, sometime today, there we go. You'll notice that I definitely have kind of a slightly bigger gap here and a large, smaller gap there. Let's say we want to increase that, right? I don't know, we can just increase the margin a little bit. Of course, you can also just go ahead and increase the bottom. Let's say we want the bottom to be a little bit bigger. Let's say we want 30 pixels there, so on and so forth. Okay, go ahead and preview, and there we go. I have a line that's separating two content areas, and I increase the gap between them with a margin. Okay, so convenient thing to do with a stack. Okay, let's go ahead and look at our final two stacks that we're going to be going over today, and it is a left floating image and a right floating image. Now these two stacks are essentially the same. It's just one has an image drop area on the left and one has one on the right. Okay, so I can go ahead and add my little ducky there. I can drag my ducky there. Okay, and if you notice here, you have an image, a styled text area to play with over here. Okay, so you have your styled text on the right here, and you have your styled text on the left on this stack. Okay, and that's essentially, again, it has the same exact settings. There's no specific settings. It's just that you drag an image out and then you put in your styled text. Okay, so that kind of goes over the basics of stacks. The last thing I'm going to go over is basically some of the stacks preferences, to kind of give you an overview of what preferences stacks has and some caveats that you might need to be aware of as you're working with your stacks pages. So to go to stacks preferences, basically you go to your page inspector, okay, and you click on the page and you'll see it's in the same exact place as we saw our advanced settings, but you'll notice that you have preferences. Okay, so there's a setting that most people have turned on because it's turned on by default. And if you notice, you'll see exactly what that is, and that's display frame outlines. So if you want to display your frame outlines, you can definitely see exactly where the stack is, okay? Or you can turn that off if you kind of wanted to see a more preview-esque view of your stacks area, okay? I prefer having the outlines turned on, mostly because it allows me to easily see where my stack is started and where it ended, okay? And then the last setting preference that we have here is reduce large images. Now, by default, these are set to, I believe, 800 pixels by 800 pixels, okay? And essentially what these are is a stopgap to basically help you from yourself, okay? I'm going to go ahead and let's find a large image, okay? It'd been great if I was ready. Hold on for 1 second. Okay, so here I have an image. Let's just drag that on my desktop. Okay, this is a screenshot, and if we look at the size of this image, it is 1280 pixels wide by 800 pixels tall. Okay. Well, let's say I wanted to add this screenshot to my website. Okay. As you would think, you would go and drag that onto your stacks page, and it hence creates an image stack for you. Okay. You can go ahead and edit the attributes of this image. Okay. Now, if you notice by default, Stacks kind of noticed that you already had a big image. Okay, it was 1280 pixels, which is pretty big for a web page, right? So it went and scaled the image down for us automatically down to 38%. Okay, so if we preview our page, we'll notice that we have a small preview of our screenshot. Okay, but I want it bigger. I want to make sure that my image is big, it's seen. Okay, so let's go ahead and scale that back up to 100%. Now, if we preview this, you'll notice that, my web page area, let's go ahead and make it a little bit wider. Okay, there we go. So you'll notice if we look at this image now, it's bigger, but it definitely isn't the 1280 pixels that the image that I drug in was. So what's going on here? What's going on? I demand to know why I don't have my image the way I wanted it. Okay? And it all has to do with that preference in the Stacks preferences. Okay? So in our Stacks preferences, we said reduce large images and make them a maximum of 800 pixels tall or 800 pixels high. So Stacks is protecting us from ourselves by saying you probably really didn't want to put in a image that was 1280 pixels tall. So I'm going to go ahead and shrink it to 800 pixels. So Stacks kept the proportion of the image, reduced our image to 800 pixels wide instead of making it 1280 pixels tall. So if I wanted to go a little bit bigger, let's say I wanted it to be 1280 pixels wide. Okay, there isn't actually allowed maximum. I think the maximum is 1100. So let's say I want 1000 pixels wide. Okay, I can go ahead and basically, after you change that preference, you have to add your image back in. Okay, go ahead, go in the image settings, change it to 100%. I preview it again, you'll notice now it's gone off the page, but it definitely is 1000 pixels wide. Okay, so again, this setting is very important if you're using large images and you're dragging them onto your web page. Okay, and you're wondering why your image is smaller than what you think or expect it should be. Okay, definitely have a look at this setting. Okay, because it's probably what your issue is. Now, another thing that users have issues with is going ahead and if you notice that, I'm going to go ahead and shrink this down. Let's go ahead and make it a little bit smaller, preview it. Now, there are times, you can't really notice it here too much, but a little bit, you'll notice that the image might be a little bit blurry or out of focus, or the image quality just isn't as good as the image that you drug into the stack. Okay, so I had a JPEG, and basically Stacks under the covers, manipulated the image, shrunk it down a little bit to protect myself. Maybe it added a border or shadow to it because I asked it to. And the image just isn't sharp. It's kind of just maybe a little bit blurry. Okay. Now, this is a known issue with Stacks. And really the only way around it is to essentially reference the image externally from Stacks. Okay. So basically don't use the actual Stacks image HUD. Okay, or the image. So don't use this. Okay, if you want to have a large screenshot of something and you want to make sure that it's still extremely crisp and clear, just as you see here, as if you were to open it locally on your machine, essentially you're going to want to use some HTML. Okay, to reference that image. Maybe you add this image to your local resources, and then you add that resource to your stacks page, okay, via HTML, okay? I'm not going to go over exactly how to do that in this cast, but that's essentially what you're going to want to do. Now, a little rabbit may have told me that things are getting better in Stacks 2. So stay tuned, and things will hopefully, in that realm will be getting better. But pretty much what we have now in Stacks 1 is pretty awesome, right? We can edit our images. Stacks saves us from ourself, and make sure that we don't upload huge 1280 pixel size, or sometimes maybe even someone drags in a JPEG from their camera and it's like 4 megapixels, right? Stacks will reduce that for you, okay, and help you save yourself from yourself, okay? So that's a great thing. The last tab that we see in the Stacks settings is defaults, okay? And that essentially allows you to change the default background, the default border, the default margin and paddings of a stack when you drag it out, okay? So that means if you drag out a new stack, what is the margin going to be set to? The default here is set to 2 pixels. Padding is set to 5 pixels. Border and background are set to 0, okay? But let's say you wanted to have every stack had a default border of 1 pixel or had a default margin of 0, okay? You could definitely change that, and where you change that is in the defaults tab within the Stacks settings, okay? So with that, that pretty much wraps up our overview of Stacks defaults, and kind of gives you a pretty thorough explanation of Stacks and how to use it, okay? So as I wrap up, please let me know if there's any other questions. Let's check out the chat room. I'm going to go ahead and give you a sneak peek at my new scroll stack. So this is my new scroll stack that I released this week, just a couple days ago. And if we look at the icon, it's a beautiful icon. That is a nice film canister. Okay. Now, as you drag this stack out, you'll notice that it has a 1 image drop area, and allows you to customize and add as many as you like, or not as many. You can have up to 50, okay? And then basically you drag your images out. I already have one set up, but basically you drag your images out that you'd like to use, okay? Now, one caveat is to really make the scroll stack shine, make sure that your images are all the same height, okay? So I've done some work, and before I added all of these images into RapidWeaver, I made sure that I resized all of them so that they were all exactly the same height, okay? I then ahead and went and made sure the scale was set to 100 so that all of the images were exactly as I expected them to be, okay? Then if we go ahead and preview scroll, you'll notice that we get a nice kind of a scrolling view of my images. You have some navigations on the left and right where you can actually go, if you hover over, you can speed through, and if the closer you get to the stack's edge, the faster the preview gets. Okay. Now, when you get to the end, essentially it will automatically go ahead and start going back in the opposite direction. However, there are some settings to modify that. So if we look at the scroll settings, you can go ahead and say what slide do you want the effect or the show to start at. By default, we start at slide number 1. Okay, so it's going to start here on number 1. But if you wanted to start it, you can start it at any position within the slide deck. Okay, speed. This of course allows you to control the speed. Do you want it to be slower or faster? Okay, loop. This basically says instead of when you reach the very last slide, go back in the opposite direction, it will loop and do an infinite loop. So once it reaches the last slide, it will go ahead and load the first slide again and just keep on scrolling in the same direction. Okay. We can also hide our navigation. Okay. So basically if we look at preview now, we'll notice that I have scroll. I've adjusted the speed so it's going a little bit faster, but my navigation is also gone. Okay. Now at any time, if you hover over, you can pause the navigation. Okay, so again, whenever your mouse enters it, the sliding will pause. Okay, and even though the navigation is hidden, it's still effective. So if I actually scroll onto the side, you can actually still navigate through your slide deck. Now, as well as hiding the navigation, you can also customize the color and opacity. So if you wanted to make sure if you wanted to have a slightly more opaque and solid color navigation, okay, you can definitely modify that so you have kind of a more solid color navigation feel for the slide deck. Okay, so that is Scroll. That's a great introduction to Scroll. I hope you like it. It is available now on my website. So make sure you go check it out, joeworkman.net. So with that, everybody, I want to thank you very much for joining today's webcast. I hope you learned a lot. I enjoy doing this, and I hope you enjoy attending them. So again, thank you very much, and till next time. See you later. Bye.